Good morning. This is Debra V. Wilson. It is Tuesday, the 28th of November, 2017, and the time is it's 1200 hours and 22 minutes, and that's GMT minus 6, and I am in Canada. So, today's podcast, I'm going to be again looking at some sociological dynamics in Britain related to security intersecting the identity that is Muslim. And my focus is twofold. First, it'll be a brief analysis of the truth about Muslim marriage, which was on Channel 4 the 21st of November, and that was on at 10 p.m. 2200 hours, that's GMT. I'll take a look at that and give my opinion on that. And then the next item that I'm going to look at is Ofsted's decision to question young Muslim females about their reasons, young Muslim females about their reasons for wearing the hijab. All right, so back to the documentary on marriage. I've noticed online in some chat spaces and some YouTube responses, reactions to the documentary from Muslim people who identify themselves as Muslims, some criticisms about the documentary. In addition, I also saw from some organizations some critique that yet again the state and the media are again looking at and analyzing Muslims. So let me start and step back a little and say, again, to identify to give voice to some of my identities. I am of African descent. I was born in the U.S. I identify now as a Canadian. I am based in Canada. I was raised Catholic and Muslim. I identify as Muslim now. I also identify as a feminist. I understand being a marginalized community, being a part of a marginalized community, and I understand the feeling of the perpetual analysis by the larger state to explain, quote unquote, this marginalized community. It was a common phenomena in the USA where I was born and raised. And I understand that the dynamics, by engaging in such perpetual analysis of a marginalized community, can only serve to further the feeling amongst the marginalized community that they are the other, and with the larger communities that the reason why they're being analyzed is because there's something inherently wrong with them, and in addition, they're the other. So no matter what the motives are for such ventures of analysis and looking, when it hits the point that it's a critical mass for some, and people feel within that community as if it's too much, it can set off the dynamics of only reinforcing that, quote unquote, we are the other. And those are people who are not in the community, it can also produce a dynamic that reinforces a narrative that they are the other. So let me start off by saying I understand that. But after viewing the documentary, which I had the good fortune to be able to see it here in Canada, and to look at it several times, I found it to be fair. I found it to be balanced. I don't know if I necessarily thought it was yet another, quote unquote, criticism of Muslim communities in the UK. I think I think there was enough blame going around to lots of different parties. For instance, At one point, there is an attorney, a British attorney, Anna Khan, who is a family lawyer and a practitioner in Islamic family law. And she mentions at one point in the documentary that she brought up some concerns around Muslim women's understanding of Muslim marriage, only the Muslim marriage without a civil ceremony coupled with it. That she believed that it was a looming problem that the government needed to address. That was 10 years ago, according to the documentary. Then Rabbi Herschel Gluck, and my apologies if I'm mispronouncing his name, mentions that part of the situation that this documentary looks at is that the Marriage Act of 1753 only mentions Anglican, Jewish, and Quaker marriages. The rabbi then mentions that prior to the narrator of this documentary, prior to that statement, the rabbi mentions that when a Jewish couple gets married in a synagogue by the rabbi, it takes care of the religious obligations for the couple and the state obligations. They're all in one. And he then makes the comment, and I'm paraphrasing, it says to a community that you belong. So for me, part of what I got from the documentary is the fact that, first of all, the laws in the UK haven't kept up with the diversity of the country, and the fact that some faiths, when they get married, it is a all-in-one. So if you are a person that wants to get married within a particular faith tradition and you follow whatever the rules, that when you do that marriage within your faith tradition also takes care of the civic, the legal component that the state needs. Currently, the nikah doesn't do that. Not in England, and not in Wales. So the question is, for me, why didn't the state keep up with the diversity in the community? Why didn't the state hear some of the concerns coming from women? I understand the state needs research to base their decisions and actions on. I do understand that. But in addition to this lawyer and the other voices that we hear in the documentary, there were people like Miriam Namazi, who was questioning. Miriam Namazi is a former Muslim, ex-Muslim, who was questioning the lack of protection under British civil law for Muslim women who married only and through the nikah and not with a civil portion added to it. So I don't know if I necessarily saw this as a criticism of Muslims. I saw that the documentary brought up some valid concerns and lack of protection for some women and men who are Muslim. I agree with the rabbi, and the basis for my research is looking at how the state caretakes its civilians, its duty, how it provides and carries out its duty, and that is by caretaking. So I understand why Muslim communities, some people within some Muslim communities in the UK feel under siege at the moment. I think in some aspects there might be some truth to that. I actually do. But I think in this particular instance, understanding how and why some people who want to exercise the right, consenting adults, to get married are not being protected and don't have the same ease of assessing legal protection from the state that other faiths do. So overwhelmingly, I am not critical of the documentary in terms of its construct of Muslim marriages. But it does bring questions to me that how and why this has been allowed to go on for so long. Now, the next item I'm going to look at is Ofsted's decision to question why some young Muslim females are wearing the hijab. The head of Ofsted, Amanda Spillman, believes that young Muslim females wearing the hijab might be indicative of a constructing young underage Muslim females in a less than appropriate manner, in an adult-like manner, as opposed, the word she used was sexualized, in a less than childlike manner. So in other words, these young Muslim females are not being accorded the protection that underage children should be accorded. And part of that is that they're being asked to perform, quote unquote, through their dress, a behavior that is more appropriate for adults. I think that's the best way to say it. I have a lot of questions about the approach of this. By the way, I do not cover. I only cover when I'm at mosque. I do not normally cover. So if I do have a bias, it's a bias on, I don't construct my faith and my belief in Islam as being attached to whether I cover or not. So that's my personal bias in this. My question about it is, they're going to have inspectors do it, so I'm wondering, will the inspectors be gender sensitive and ethnic sensitive? Also wonder what the dynamics, and I don't know the answer to this, but I'm questioning, of asking a child a question that they ultimately, yes, the child can choose to wear the hijab, but the parent makes the final choice, whether parents want to admit it or not. Because you can choose as a child to wear whatever you want to wear, but typically in the average home, the parent has to provide you with that item of clothing. My concern is for communities that may already feel marginalized, for the state to, in essence, what the state is saying is that the children are not being parented properly. And also, there are times when the state should step in between child and parent. The state has a duty to do it, and the state can legally do it. There's no problem. But I don't know if the state is constructing this as abuse. And if that's the case, some people would definitely argue that. But if the state is not constructing this as abuse, then I would ask, will the parents have the option of being there when their children are interviewed? And also, what if the child is being abused, the state wants to step in, and who cares how the parent conceptualizes that you're disrespecting them, blah, 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 blah. If the state has justifiably identified that child as being abused. But if that's not the case, then what is the state doing by, I don't know, and I'm asking, what is the state doing to the dynamics of the relationship between child and parent in this particular scenario, this scenario only? And I don't know the answer to that. So that's my, so my questions are, who are the inspectors? Will they be, what genders the inspectors will be, and what ethnicity? might make a significant difference to both the children and some of the parents, if not a good portion of the parents. And then the other thing I'm curious about is, will the parents have the option of being there? And then the other question is so if the child says, no, I didn't want to wear this. I went to a Catholic all-girls grammar school and high school and university as well. But in any case, all female. In any case, when I was a child, I didn't want to wear the uniform. There were very few Catholics in the neighborhood in which I grew up in, and I wore a uniform, a Catholic school uniform, because my parents told me to. They purchased it and told me to. So thinking back to myself as a child, I'm just wondering if someone from the state asked me why I was wearing the uniform. In my case, it would be because my parents told me to. But then I also think what that would leave me with in terms of what I now thought about my parents. I don't think it would systemically change my relationship with my parents, but I would wonder why someone from the state was asking me about what my mother and father, about the clothes my mother and father wanted me to wear. So I do have concerns about that. I think in all the research that I do, my concern is getting to an answer that is the most constructive and the most beneficial for the greater good. And I'm always concerned about the ramifications of my actions. And when I'm looking at the state, I'm looking at the ramifications of the state's actions. And when I'm looking at larger civil societies and how they respond to, in my case, what I'm looking at is national security models, I'm looking at the ramifications of the responses from civil societies. I don't know the answer to the Ofsted query. On a personal level, I'm question why I question why very young females are wearing the hijab. I don't know why they would, but that's me with my personal bias about the hijab. But beyond my personal bias, I wonder, in a country in which there are already significant questions of identity, and some Muslims are already feeling marginalized, and some Muslims are already feeling about the lives they live are under a microscope, then I guess I want a better understanding of what the goal is here. And then if the goal is a noble goal and an ethical goal, hypothetically thinking, is this the way to achieve whatever that goal might be? So those are some of my questions. And I also want to mention that before I end this podcast, because I feel like I've gone very long, when I was doing some preliminary research for this podcast, I saw Ofsted has a school in Stamford Hill. It's also in the UK. They've voiced concern about the curriculum. It's a Hasidic school, and the school's curriculum is too strict and religiously based and not expansive enough to meet the standards they would hope a school would meet for educating children. This is Debra V. Wilson. Take a listen to the podcast. Think yourself. Ask multi-dimensional questions about the two items I brought up: the truth about Muslim marriage and about Ofsted's desire to question Muslim female children about their reasons for wearing the hijab. Ask why, ask the dynamics these activities produce, ask the necessity for these dynamics. Asking the question in your head does no harm. Ask the question and think. with the goal, and my perspective is what is the greater good that does the least damage, that comes up with the most functional response. By the way, I should mention, I try to give a clear indication of who I am and my bias. At one point, I was going to be a Catholic nun, so I started off in the process to be a Catholic nun. So I'm always looking at whatever you do, even if it's in the name of service, what am I doing? How am I changing the space? What are the ramifications of my actions? So keep that in mind. Look at the intent of the actions. Try to understand the intent of the actors who are engaging in these actions, and whether noble or not, the outcome of the actions, the ramifications. Try to think outside of your own comfort zone and outside of your own personal bias, and try to come up with your own understanding of what's happening and what it means for the collective societies that are being impacted by the actions. All right, this is Debra V. Wilson. It is, I'm in Canada. Thank you.